Alright, let me take you back, way back, to the first time I felt something shift in my life. To the moment things started spiraling in ways I could never have imagined. I'm Sophia, and my story? Well, it's not your typical, happy family type of story. No, this one's got a dark twist. So, picture this, I was 18, and my dad, Roberto, was this hardworking, caring guy who always had my back. He was the kind of dad who'd drop everything to help you, no matter what. And then there's her, my stepmom, Isabella. She wasn't your average stepmom. No, she was something else. She was this beautiful, charismatic woman in her late 30s who somehow seemed to have it all together. Always put together. Always charming. And, like every guy who meets her, my dad was completely hooked. I remember the day they met like it was yesterday. My dad had been a single parent for years, and then Isabella walked into our lives. She was kind, patient, and honestly, I thought she was just trying to make our family better. And at first, it was great. My dad was happy, and I could see it, he loved her. But looking back now, I can't help but wonder if he even knew the real Isabella. The one who hid secrets that no one, especially him, could have ever imagined. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just like having a new mother figure. But something happened along the way that changed everything. See, Isabella and we weren't like the typical stepmother and stepdaughter. We started talking more, and before long, we were spending a lot of time together. I never thought there was anything wrong with it. She was always so open with me, you know? She listened when I needed someone, and in a way, I felt like I could tell her things I couldn't even say to my own dad. But then, it started to feel different. The way she'd look at me sometimes, the way she'd smile a little too long. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something beneath the surface that didn't feel right. And then there was Roberto, my dad. He was always so oblivious, so wrapped up in his world with Isabella, that he never saw it coming. It wasn't just the small gestures anymore either. The tension between Isabella and me, between her and my dad, grew. And at first, I thought maybe it was just me. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But I wasn't. Something was happening between Isabella and me, something neither of us were prepared to admit. As the weeks went by, it became clear, we were trapped in a web neither of us could escape. A bond that neither of us planned for, but couldn't ignore. It was a quiet thing at first, building in the background. And trust me, I was just as confused as you'd expect me to be. I mean, how do you even process something like this? It all started with the simplest things. It's like when I was in the kitchen late one night making myself a snack. I thought I was alone, Dad had gone to bed early for once, but when I turned around Isabella was standing in the doorway. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but I could feel the change, as if he knew what was going to happen. I froze for a second, wondering if this was the moment when everything was going to collapse. Instead, he approached, his voice hoarse as he asked if I needed help. The way he said it, so ordinary, as if nothing had changed, made my heart flutter. And when he reached out to give me something from the counter, his fingers rubbed against mine, giving me a jolt inside. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the undeniable attraction that had been there since the first kiss, and I couldn't stop her anymore. This was not just a temporary desire. It was real. No matter how much I hated myself for feeling this, I wanted more. We both did. Neither of us could retreat. It was the afternoon of the next day, when everything got even more out of control. Dad had to go to a meeting, and Isabella and I were alone again. I was in the living room, rummaging through a book, trying to distance myself from the temptation. But then I heard him approaching slowly and deliberately. I didn't move. I couldn't, I knew what was going to happen. He sat down next to me, his leg resting on mine. The touch was small, innocent, but it was enough. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He didn't look at me, he didn't say anything, but I could feel him. Her body is very close to mine, the smell of it, vanilla and something else I can't decipher, fills the air between us. Then he kissed me. Not gently this time. It was desperate, it was crazy, like we were both trying to make up for all the time we'd wasted. We didn't stop. This was not a moment of weakness, this was a choice. It's a choice to give in to everything we've been avoiding. We moved together, our bodies found each other as if they had always known how. I didn't care if it was wrong. I didn't care that it didn't happen. All I cared about was how he made me feel. He wanted to live as if I mattered in a way that no one had ever made me feel before. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't do this to my dad. I went to my room with that feeling of guilt. I'd been in my room, pretending to study, but my thoughts were far from anything academic. I couldn't focus. Not with Isabella so close, always lingering in the corners of my mind, always just out of reach. Then I heard it, her footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. My heart started to race. She entered the room without knocking, her presence filling the space. For a split second, we just stood there, both of us knowing what was about to happen but unable to stop it. And then the storm finally broke. I couldn't stay away, she whispered, her voice barely higher than the rain. Neither could I. I reached out to him, pulled him closer until there was no space between us. December. Her body was warm, her curves fit me like a jigsaw puzzle piece that I didn't know I was missing. The vanilla scent of her skin mixed with the light metallic tone of the rain, and I inhaled it as if it was the only air I needed. Our lips met and the kiss was everything, soft and aching, then hungry and urgent. His hands found my shoulders, his fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt, as if he was afraid I might get lost. I felt the heat of his palms through the thin material, the pressure grounded me even as I felt dizzy. Her lips moved along my jawline, leaving a path of warmth that took my breath away. I buried my fingers in her damp hair, feeling the silkiness of each strand as she tilted her face back to meet mine. The kiss deepened and the world outside disappeared. It was just us, his breath mingling with mine, his heart pounding against my chest, the press of his body igniting every nerve. We stumbled backwards and my back hit the edge of the table. He didn't stop. His hands wandered, he explored, he claimed. I could feel his pulse under my fingertips, fast and frantic, matching my own. The lamp flickered as we moved, casting shifting shadows on the walls that danced like the ghosts of our guilt. The sound of the rain got louder, or maybe it was my heartbeat that filled my ears. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was the feel of his lips against mine, the way his breath stopped when my hands found the curve of his waist, the way my own skin burned where he touched me. As she drew back, her lips swollen and her eyes dimmed, she rested her forehead against mine. Her breath came in shallow gasps and I could see the glow of emotion in her eyes, fear, desire, love, all mixed together in a way that made my chest ache. We mustn't, she whispered, her voice trembling. But we can't stop, I replied, my voice barely more than a breath away. He nodded, his fingers squeezing my shirt. The words hung between us, a fragile truth that neither of us could decry. The rest of the world didn't matter at that moment. Not the rain, not the secrets, not the results. It's just him. Just us. The days that followed were an unbearable mix of stolen moments and suffocating guilt. Isabella and I were careful, so careful, but every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a spark threatening to ignite everything around us. My father, Roberto, remained blissfully unaware, caught up in his own world, completely blind to the storm brewing under his own roof. We tried to talk about it, about what we were doing and where it could lead, but the words never seemed to come. When we were apart, reason would creep in, whispering about the destruction this could cause, the lives that could unravel. But when we were together, all reason vanished. There was only us. One evening, we found ourselves alone again. My father had been called away for a last-minute work trip, leaving the house eerily quiet. Isabella and I sat in the living room, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and sadness, and I knew this was a crossroads. We can't keep doing this, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It's wrong. It's selfish. Your father, her voice broke, and she looked away, biting her lip. I reached for her hand, my touch gentle but firm. I know, I said, my own voice trembling. But what if we can? What if we just keep this between us? No one has to know. Her gaze snapped back to mine, her eyes wide with disbelief. Sophia, we're playing with fire. If he ever found out. He won't, I interrupted, my grip on her hand tightening. We'll be careful. We'll be so careful. Please, Isabella. I can't lose this. I can't lose you. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for some kind of reassurance. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she'd just let go of a weight too heavy to bear. All right, she said softly. But you have to promise me, Sophia. If this ever gets too dangerous, we stop. No questions, no arguments. We stop. I nodded, relief flooding through me. I promise. And so we began our delicate dance, navigating a web of secrecy and stolen moments. We became masters of discretion, careful to never let our stolen glances linger too long, never let our hands brush when anyone else was around. The thrill of it was intoxicating, but the weight of what we were doing loomed over us like a shadow, a constant reminder of the line we had crossed. Every time I saw my father, guilt gnawed at me, but I buried it deep. I convinced myself that this was for the best, that he didn't need to know, that it would only hurt him. As long as Isabella and I kept our secret, as long as we were careful, everything would be fine. Or so I told myself. The truth was, we were walking a razor's edge, and I had no idea how long we could keep our balance. But for now, we had each other, and that was all that mattered. For now, the storm stayed just out of reach. And as long as it did, we would keep dancing in the shadows, clinging to a love we were never meant to have.